Alyssa, honestly, I'm so glad to be doing this right now. I can't tell you how excited I am to have this conversation with you. You know, you're one of the few people in the world that's received your rocket license before your driver's license. You know, I've read a lot about your story. I've watched, every TED talk you've done. You know, from the age of 3, you wanted to become an astronaut since watching, those cartoons going to space, and, it triggered your imagination. And I absolutely love that story, and I really want to hear your story. What is the sequence of events that have led you to going from, a dreaming 3-year-old into you today, who's a potential candidate at NASA for NASA's Mars mission in 2033? So I'd love if you can take us through, the chronological orders of what were some of the major events, the milestones, some of the trainings you've had to undergo up until today.
Yeah, totally. I mean, basically, ever since I was little, I've always been fascinated with space and the idea of traveling to space. And then the more I was able to learn about it, the more interested I was. So basically, when I was little, I was really just trying to gather as much information about space as I possibly could. I mean, when I was very little, that was, going to the library and picking out, a book about space or about planets or any little thing that I could get my hands on. And so that's kind of where it started. And, my dad saw my interest in space. And then by chance, we ended up seeing a billboard for space camp and
Mm.
all of that stuff going on. So we had visited the center, and then I brought back a brochure for space camp to my dad, and I was begging my dad to go. I was still pretty young at the time. This was probably when I was about 6 or so when I went and visited. But I mean, even visiting the center, being able to see full size rockets, and it was definitely a wonderful experience. But I begged my dad to go to space camp. Then at 7, me and my dad did a family camp. And so we went for a long weekend, spent the weekend there at space camp. And it was just absolutely the best weekend of my life. I was being able to learn all the information about space I had been wanting to know. I was with other people who were interested in space. I was building my own model rocket. I was acting out the roles of astronauts and really just gathering all that information that I've been wanting to learn. So we made Space Camp kind of a pretty frequent thing. Got to know everyone at Space Camp. Space Camp definitely became our second family. So definitely a special place there. But yeah, basically I just continued going to Space Camp as well as some other camps around the country that just related to either space or rocketry or robotics or anything related. But really I was just trying to learn more about the different roles in space to really decide what I would actually want to be as working in the space industry. There are so many different jobs that you can go into. So basically, I just continued through camp, and then I was also looking at other things that could benefit a resume for an astronaut. So I was looking at getting my scuba certification. At that time, I was looking towards the future of getting my pilot's license and things like that. So I had those small goals that I wanted to do, but basically progressed, got those things. And then as far as more realistic training, I joined Project Possum, and I joined that when I was 15, which is basically a citizen science research organization, which basically means it's a whole bunch of everyday people wanting to contribute to science in their free time. So it was really cool. Everyone else was definitely a lot older than I was, so a little intimidating at first, but basically with them, I've been able to do microgravity flights, water survival
Wow.
training, different research campaigns. The majority of their research has to do a lot with a certain type of cloud in the upper atmosphere, so I got involved in a lot in that. Yeah, and then continuing to do as much realistic stuff. Like I said, whether that's decompression, working with real spacesuits, we work a lot with Final Frontier spacesuit design and actually testing suits, so that's pretty cool. But pretty much nowadays, I'm just a college student. I'm a sophomore at Florida Tech studying astrobiology. So kind of focus a little bit on school right now to get that under my wing, I guess.
Yeah, it is required by NASA actually, and that's actually something I want to dive into a bit later in terms of your education. But what's super fascinating is actually Project Possum that you've been. So that was the most hands-on training you've had in terms of training to become an astronaut. So I'd like to know more, in depth. What were some of the exercises you've had to undergo? You've mentioned, for example, You went into simulated gravity. Um, what was your experience? Experiencing G force. Like, can you take me through some examples?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it's totally right. I mean, Project Possum was really where I was able to do like realistic stuff. I mean, definitely at Space Camp it was absolutely great and all, but a lot of it was, as far pretend or as far realistic as they can get. But with Project Possum, we were definitely working with real research, and everything that we did was for some sort of research benefit. So for example, like you're talking about our microgravity flight, we went up
Mhm.
in a Falcon 20 plane and we did parabolas. So we did all the crazy, like,
Wow.
little hills in the airplane. And normally people do that for fun just to be able to float. However, of course, everything we do has to be for research. So we had a whole bunch of experiments going on at the same time while we were floating. So, for example, we were testing the spacesuit. So my job was actually to monitor the test subject that was actually doing all the stuff in the suit. So I had to make sure that he still looked healthy. I was watching all the tasks he was doing, making sure he completed all of his tasks during each parabola, just basically monitoring him, especially because if he got sick, then that's kind of the end of the road for us because he's locked into a spacesuit. So we really need to not keep pushing him. And so, yeah, so really just monitoring him. He might say he's okay, but that does not always mean they're okay. So, really got to watch out for that. But that was super cool to actually be able to feel it. The first one that we did was really an opportunity just to like get a feel of what it was like. So, that was a little bit of like a fun one just to like float around and have a good time. Um, we had someone doing like backflip spins in the air,
Yeah.
so definitely had fun for at least one of our parabolas. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, no, there's definitely been all sorts of amazing different research that I've been able to be a part of. The water survival was definitely one of the most intense as well as just really fun experiences. We did a lot of basic water survival, but we also connected it to space. So I was able to
Yeah.
swim in spacesuits, climb into life rafts in spacesuits. We also had a mock up of a capsule, and we were learning how to escape. Let's say you crash landed back to Earth, you were in the ocean like they usually do, and let's say there was
Wow.
a leak. We learned how to escape while wearing a spacesuit, how you would stay safe, stay warm, those sorts of things. So that was really amazing to be able to learn that. Yeah, and I mean, it's really just been a combination of learning those things. Basically, with Project Possum, you have like your first introductory week, which is great, where you learn a little bit about the program, a bit about the research. You get to do one flight up in a plane. You do a little bit of decompression training to learn like your symptoms when you start running out of oxygen. We did a little bit of testing with some spacesuits, but after that, I've continued on to do other research campaigns with them as well.
How has your training been impacted in 2020?
It's definitely taken a huge hit. I haven't been able to do just about anything in
Right.
2020. It's definitely been over a year now since I've been able to go somewhere and do an actual training or research campaign or anything like that. So the last one I did was actually last October. I went up to Canada with the Canadian Space Agency, and I was working with Project Possum, testing a different kind of spacesuit using a gravity offset system. So we were able to manipulate with weight the different like sense of gravity that you were feeling. So we could simulate the moon, we could simulate Mars, we could simulate microgravity, and
Ah.
so we were doing different tests. We were testing different geology tools and things like that for a moon or Mars mission. So that was actually the last one that I was able to do. I usually, I don't always get to do them all the time. I definitely have to work around school schedule and things like that. So I did that one in October, and then I was planning on doing some in 2020, which obviously never happened. And then also I was planning on doing other things as well. Over the summer, I wanted to continue flying, get my next rating, my instrument rating in terms of being a pilot. So yeah, so there's definitely been a lot of stuff put on hold. So just trying to make the most of the year. But yeah, hopefully can get back to doing some stuff sometime soon.
That sounds super interesting. Can you tell us what's the difference in terms of feeling when you tested Moon's gravity compared to Mars's gravity? Because as an engineer, we look at a lot of numbers. It's very quantifiable. G. G-force. But for you, you've actually experienced that. What are some different feelings you got?
Yeah, well, definitely the moon has less gravity than Mars. So, Mars is about one third of the Earth's gravity. So definitely not as strong as what we're used to. So you'll still kind of bounce around a little bit, but there's definitely
Mhm.
still a good amount of force there to kind of keep you on your keep you on the ground and keep you a bit more normal, I guess, looking when you walk. The moon is a little bit more adventurous. So the moon is like about one sixth of the Earth's gravity. So, for example, like when you jump, it's going to take a little while to come back down. You kind of have to bounce around a lot. Probably you really have to change your movements a good bit. You know, when astronauts did go to the moon in the Apollo days, they actually had to train for different ways to walk, and that's why it's, looking back at a lot of the footage from the moon, you see them falling over like all the time. They're always tumbling and slipping and
Yeah,
falling.
those are funny.
And it's just because you just have to get used to that strange movement of being so bouncy, and being so light. And so, yeah, it's definitely something that's totally different, very difficult to move around. But yeah, trying to use some of those walks that they teach can help a little bit. But yeah, you definitely can't just walk as you normally would.
Something I want to talk about, which we were talking a bit before starting this podcast, is your education. Your end goal is becoming an astronaut, ideally being the first human on Mars. And I know NASA is very rigorous in terms of the academic background that astronauts need to have. I believe the first requirement is to have some form of engineering or science background. So, what are some of the courses as a young adult? What are some of the courses you're currently taking that are forming you in a way to become a future astronaut?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that is one of the awesome things about becoming an astronaut, because when you really look at it, an astronaut isn't really a job. So you have to have a job before you can apply to be an astronaut. It's really just kind of like a location that you can go and perform all the knowledge that you have for whatever job that you're interested in. So, really, to apply as an astronaut, you just have to study anything in the STEM realm. So, I mean, you can be anywhere from a pilot to a scientist, you can study medicine, you can study really any type of science, and eventually possibly be involved in the space program, not only as an astronaut, but there are so many different jobs regarding that. But yeah, so basically, NASA has, specifically for NASA, of course, there's other selection processes around the world, but for NASA, they've made it to where you have to have at least a master's degree for whatever discipline that you're studying. So currently, I'm studying astrobiology, which would lead me to be more of a scientist. Basically, when I was younger, I figured out pretty early on that I didn't want to be a pilot or commander or any of those roles within space. I was always more interested in possibly being a mission specialist, some sort of research scientist, the one being able to do an EVA, go out and be involved and like do something. That's really what I was curious about. So I'm now studying astrobiology, which is really fascinating because your level of research or the things that you can really look into can range anywhere from little bacteria to plants in space to entire planets if you want to. So it really leaves a lot of room for research, which is really cool. But yeah, really, astrobiology is just any sort of science in space. Basically, as a student, I have to take all the sciences, everything, every type of all the different sciences. So pretty much every semester it's the same thing: more bio, more chem, more physics, more math. That's just about all I take. There definitely are a few space courses thrown in there. I've taken like an intro to space science and also have a specific astrobiology class. But yeah, for the most part, it's really just going in depth into all the sciences. So yeah, so I will continue on taking that route as my education background to apply to become an astronaut. Yeah, and see where that goes. It really just fell with what I was interested in, because you definitely have to look at it. The astronaut selection process is very stiff competition. It's very
Right.
tough to be selected. So you definitely want to pick something that you'd be more than happy to do here on Earth as well.
Yeah, and also what's interesting about you is that from a very young age, you've kind of positioned yourself in a way where you have this end goal and you're kind of positioning yourself versus a lot of people who, they make this career decision somewhere around, their early adulthood. So for you, you've really like started early. You also mentioned masters. What are some ideas you have to go into masters?
Yeah, so probably my biggest idea right now for my master's degree is International Space University. So they're actually based in Strasbourg, France. But
Hmm.
yeah, they actually only have like two majors. So it wouldn't necessarily be in astrobiology. I think it would just be more of a general space science degree that I'd be getting. But yeah, I definitely got interested in ISU when I was about 14 or so. I started hearing more about them. But they're definitely a very intense program. I think you like go through your master's in 9 months. So they really push you and work you to get through whatever it is you're interested in. So anyway, I had listened to a few of their classes and got interested. So we'll see, but that's probably my highest choice at the moment.
Something I want to talk about, which is NASA's 2033 mission to the moon. What is the primary goal of that mission?
Yeah, I mean, basically everything that we're doing now in the space program is really looking to progress further into deeper space exploration. So we've spent a lot of time in low Earth orbit working on the International Space Station, which has been amazing. We've gained a lot of knowledge from that, but definitely looking now towards deeper space exploration. So the goal right now is to go back to the moon in the late 2020. So in the next few years, hopefully sending people back to the moon, maybe around like 2026, and then eventually going to Mars in the early 2030s. So both have kind of their own separate goals. So right now we're looking at going back to the moon, really just to test out the rocket, really just get things narrowed out before we send someone 6 months away. We want to make sure everything's working properly and working well. So yeah, so there's going to be missions to the moon to kind of get things tested out, and also we can probably gain a lot more knowledge about the moon nowadays than we had in the 60s. So could definitely be a lot of scientific gain from there as well. But looking at the mission to Mars in the 2030s, the biggest thing that we're looking to achieve is really just a better understanding of Mars. You know, you hear a lot of people talking about terraforming Mars, colonizing Mars, all these big ideas that we have to do with Mars. But we're really not going to be able to do those things if we don't have a full understanding of Mars, what we're working with, and again, if those things are possible, how long they're going to take. But yeah, there's definitely a lot to do on Mars. Like I said, it's going to be a lot of learning, whether that is, you know, testing more of the soil on Mars, testing a lot of the water samples on Mars, looking for signs of bacterial life in the water that's there, learning more about the atmosphere. We can also see if there's any resources on Mars that could possibly be useful to problems that we have here. But definitely the ultimate goal would be that would be another place for us to stay. You know, let's say population continued to increase, we could have another place to stay. And right now, the time frame for traveling from Earth to Mars is about 6 months. We do know that we have technology with plasma engines that can actually reduce that to 6 weeks. But definitely, as technology will improve, we will eventually get that shorter. So it could possibly be that a trip to Mars could be nothing and no big deal in the future, but we definitely have to take those first steps before we can actually get to that point.
You know, that analogy reminds me of, 200 years ago when you had, Spanish adventurers. They would travel by boat, from Europe to America, the Americas. And then we have airplanes. So, we literally cut the time traveled by 10, just like you said. But I actually never heard about the plasma engines. What is that exactly?
Yeah, so they actually won't be used on the first missions to Mars. So they're a relatively newer technology. They're working on them a lot. Kind of weird where near where Space Camp is, but at Marshall Space Flight Center is where they've been doing a lot of research on them. But basically, since they are newer technology, with everything in space, it has to go through so many tests to make sure it's safe for the astronauts, safe for every other part of the rocket, and all that. So it is a future plan. So and the mission to Mars in the 2030s will likely still use the engines that take 6 months, which is kind of reusing a lot of even older engines. So that's the main reason why those engines take so long, is because we're actually reusing a lot of the shuttle engines for the new rockets. So a lot of reusing going on, a lot of old technology going on. But yeah, they're still working out all the details of the plasma engines and stuff. But yeah, they have hopes that they can easily get there in 6 weeks.
Do you think that the first mission to Mars is going to be more of a colonization type where they expect the astronaut to stay there a few years or a decade, or is it more going to be like, a touch and go where you go there for a few weeks and then come back to Earth with any data you have?
Yeah, I mean, that's super interesting question. I really don't think that with Mars, it's going to be possible to do some sort of touch and go, sadly. So the thing about going to Mars is that Mars is definitely a lot further than anything else we've done. So we're expecting it to be about a 6 month journey, and that is when Earth and Mars are the closest. So basically, since all the planets don't orbit in perfect circles, they orbit in kind of ellipticals, oval shapes. That means that sometimes Mars is closer and sometimes Mars is a lot further away. So basically, we are going to launch and go to Mars, coming up when it's getting to be its closest point of contact. And that's why it'll take that 6 months. But after that, Mars will continue to rotate and get further away from Earth. So astronauts will likely have to spend probably about a year on Mars, maybe a little bit longer. It all kind of depends on the orbits and where everything's at. But yeah, it'll likely be probably about a year just waiting for the planets to realign to be able to come back home. So you wouldn't have to spend months and months and months traveling in between, because definitely with all the effects on your body of space, whether that's muscle loss, losing bone density, all those, you have a much greater risk of those being in microgravity than being on Mars that has at least some gravity. So yeah, the astronauts are already probably going to have to stay there a good bit of time. So a year is a pretty good chunk of time to start having some sort of colonization. But yeah, probably nothing longer than that.
I have two back-to-back questions actually about what you just said. So you mentioned you have 6 months of traveling. That's a lot of time, just hanging around in the same cubic meter of space. What was NASA's plan of doing? Do we have some form of hibernation technology? Is that something that's been tested and safe? Like as someone who's actually, I'm asking as a as a viewer, but you're actually someone that could potentially experience this one day. So I'm sure this is something you've thought about in some way. So what are you going to be doing for 6 months?
Yeah, definitely there have been plenty of talks about the whole like hibernation idea. But the interesting thing is that, even though it is 6 months of what seems like nothing, just kind of traveling time, but the area of space that we're going to be traveling is still uncharted territory. It's still a section of space that no one has ever been before. We've only been to the moon, so that distance past that is really a whole new experience. So there will probably be at least some experiments that we will have to do, whether that is photography of the moon or testing the radiation levels at that section in our solar system. Maybe we'll have a better view at seeing other things in space from that viewpoint. So there's definitely some other things that we could be doing, other research, any sort of preparations for once we get to Mars. All those sorts of things definitely come into play. The biggest advantage of, for example, like a hibernation or something like that would be not having to worry about food supply or that's all the extras that you would need to pack, and which weight comes cost a lot of the time in space. So being able to kind of have a way to reduce that weight could be helpful. But yeah, so it's kind of a toss up. I think that they're looking more towards like gaining the science out of it. So it'll probably just be like, just like the astronauts on the International Space Station, they usually spend about 6 months up there doing experiments. And we can also bring our own experiments as well if they're something that we think could be in addition to the mission. So yeah, so there's definitely some stuff that we could do.
Would you be comfortable going knowing that there won't be a return mission within a few years?
I mean, I think that for me personally, I would still be for going on a mission to Mars if like the only option was like to never return. But I definitely think that there's too many people now, especially looking at having the return. Plus, I think in general, well, NASA has kind of said that they don't really do one-way missions. They're all about bringing the astronauts home safely. It's just kind of part of their program and what they do. But I think at the same time, especially for the first mission to space, I think let's say we work towards colonization at some point where you'd stay a bit longer term. But I do believe that for the first missions, we're gonna want to bring back like a Mars rock. Like I'm sure museums gonna want something. I'm sure stuff is going to happen like that, as well as we're only going to be able to bring so much scientific equipment with us. So we're going to be able to run tests, we're going to be able to do experiments, do research, but there's going to be an extent to what we do. So I definitely think bringing stuff back to continue the science, to continue the research, is going to be necessary as well to actually bring some of that stuff back. So yeah, I think that there would be that there will be a return, but I would go if there wasn't any other options. But I just think that there's too many other people in the in
Yeah.
the field to be to not have a return.
That's so exciting. You're about to become the real life Matt Damon. You know, you are the literal incarnation of passion. You know, from a really young age, you've found something that really passions you, and you've really positioned yourself on a journey where you're going to be able to turn that passion into a living. You know, and you are in a position where a lot of people would dream to be. You know, a lot of people have a dream to become an astronaut, to become an actor, an actress, an engineer. What a lot of people have different passions, you know. And one question I personally have for you is, how have you been able throughout the years to stick with your passion and really stay focused on that? Because as individuals, we change as we grow older. We change. For my case, for example, I went into engineering 4 years ago because I had a passion for renewable energy. My goal, my passion was to create the next generation of green buildings. 4 years down the road, I'm still passionate about that topic, but look at me, I'm here conducting podcasts. So we change as individuals. So I was wondering, what would you recommend for people that have this passion? What is your tip to sticking to it and really not lose faith?
Yeah, totally. I think that in general, how you're saying most people kind of don't really have it figured out exactly what they want to do or what their passion may be. And I think a lot of that stems from, we aren't really pushed as people or as kids to think about what we want to do, because ultimately you don't have to make that decision until you're picking a major in college. But before that, there's nothing really pushing you to go out and look for different jobs that you might be interested in. Or I mean, yeah, schools have like career fairs and things like that to encourage it, but there's nothing really pushing you to make a decision or to decide or to start working towards any of those goals. And so I think that's kind of where it kind of starts at, as to where we're really waiting a little bit longer to start seeing how you can get involved in what you want to do. Whereas you can actually start getting involved in a lot of really interesting things, even at a young age. And I think along with that is it's super important to keep like a balanced life as well. So of course your passion is going to be something you want to work on, but it's definitely not something that you want to work on absolutely all the time. Me growing up, obviously I was interested in space, but I wasn't always talking about space or always doing something towards space. Living that normal life as well was super important, especially because let's say I had the opportunity to go somewhere and do something towards space. I was excited and I was ready to do it because I don't get to do it all the time. I had that opportunity to go and work towards it. And so I think kind of keeping your passion in a special place is pretty important. It's not just something that is an everyday thing. It's something that you should be excited to go do. And that's definitely how space was for me, especially, with school and all the other components of life. There's always other stuff kind of trying to get in the way. So really take advantage of the time that you have to actually work towards whatever your goals are. But, I definitely, when I was younger, the idea of being an astronaut was absolutely the most crazy thing I could have picked. But yeah, definitely sticking more with it makes it become more and more of a reality. So it's definitely realizing, even if it's a long-term goal, I mean, for example, like the mission to Mars, even now it's still, 10 years at least away. And so having those long-term goals, it's really important to break it down, have those smaller goals. I mean, for example, right now I'm really focused on just getting through college, getting through this semester, getting through this class. And so having those small goals along the way can really build propelled you towards your ultimate goal. But yeah, you definitely have to realize that each step is a piece towards that larger goal.
Did you ever get to a breaking point where you just wanted to give up? Especially you've through the years you've amassed enough, I'm gonna say media attention. You've become a personality. People love you for who you are. You can literally be whoever you want. You can become an actress. You can become a YouTuber. You can be a TikToker. You can be anything you want. Keeping consistency in your message. Did it ever come through your mind that what? Actually, it's cool to be an astronaut, but I have this other thing.
Yeah, I mean, when I was a little kid, I still kind of bounced around between like different careers. But the way I always thought about it was that I'd be an astronaut, go to space, come back, and then be a doctor or whatever it was at the time, be a teacher, be the president, whatever I had in my head that week. But for some reason, being an astronaut was always pretty much first on my list. But kind of besides that, I mean, continuing to grow up. I mean, speaking has definitely become a huge part of my life as well. Being able to speak and inspire and teach kids about space. So definitely becoming a science communicator and a space communicator has definitely become a part of my life. But it definitely hasn't, I guess, gotten to the point where I would rather do that by any means. I definitely think that to continue to get my point across as a science communicator, I have to achieve what I've been pushing and what I've been teaching. And so I definitely don't think that I'm necessarily at a point to switch to something else. But at the same time, I mean, definitely looking, even if I didn't have this dream at a young age, science and math has always been what I'm good at and what I'm more interested in. So I think at the end of the day, I would have always ended up in some sort of STEM field. And I mean, even going through college, you always have doubts about your major and what you're doing and if it's too tough for you or if you can make it through it. So yeah, even in those moments, I mean, I don't even looking at college, I don't even know what I would switch to. I mean, I think I was thinking about that actually freshman year. I was like, is astrobiology too hard? I was like, I think the only other thing I'd be interested in doing is like maybe biology. Like, there's not really that much of a
Mhm.
switch. So, yeah, I definitely still have my full interest in continuing to pursue this. And I mean, of course, the future always changes with whatever, but I at least feel pretty confident in like my major and what I look to do as a career.
I love that. Listen, Alyssa, to close things off, I have a few questions that were asked from the worldwide engineering community. I made a poll yesterday, or actually 2 days ago, and people really got to ask their questions to you. So, how does it sound if we go through some of the questions and maybe we can answer them rapid fire? How does
Sure,
that
yeah,
sound?
sounds great.
All right, so that's a question by I am Ax 830 and Mo. His question is, has have you ever tried space food yet?
I mean, I guess kind of. I mean, I've tried like all the like merchandise, like whatever that they sell in the gift shops, like space ice cream. I also used to eat all the time as a kid. It was almost like they called it like a space food stick. It was like a stick of like peanut butter and who knows what else. But I don't know. I ate that as well. I always thought those were good. But I mean, really, space food nowadays is really just turned into everyday food. They have anywhere from shrimp cocktail to mac and cheese to, they have, all sorts of stuff up there now. So space food really now is almost the same as what we have here. Astronauts can really ask for anything and they can try to work it out. I mean, obviously, some foods are off limits in space, but for the most part, they can kind of figure some stuff out.
Cool. Question by Angela. Is there any chance for a person who is almost 30 to become an astronaut?
Yeah, totally. I definitely think that if you have some of, or like the credentials to apply to the astronaut selection program, which really is just a master's, some work experience, I would assume by 30 you have some sort of nice work experience with whatever you're focused on. And then really past that is just passing the physical. So the typical age of an astronaut is really mid to late 30s anyway. So it's definitely right there in the range. Actually, our youngest astronaut in the US is 35, which is absolutely crazy to think about. But yeah, so astronauts are actually more towards the late 30s age range. Actually, if you look at the most recent SpaceX launch, they just sent astronauts up to the International Space Station. The youngest astronaut on that mission was 44. So definitely, if you're 30, you're well within range.
Actually, I'm curious, is there a cap? Like, what's the oldest astronaut they've sent?
I'm pretty sure the old, I don't know the exact number. I know he was in his 70s. I think it was like 72,
Wow.
73, somewhere around that. It was Gus Grissom, I'm pretty sure. Um, I think that's right. Maybe it was someone else. Okay, I might be getting that confused. But
That's
I
okay.
know he was in his 70s. But basically, he was an astronaut several times. He wanted to push himself, send him to space in his 70s. He wanted to be crazy like that. A lot of the early astronauts were. But yeah, they don't typically send 70-year-olds anymore. There's not necessarily a cap. There's not like a defined age that they cut people off at. It's really all about health, depending on where you are in a health stance. You're constantly taking physicals if you're an astronaut, and typically most astronauts, once they get especially late 50s, most of them tend to retire anyway, just for themselves and wanting to have a more relaxed lifestyle from then on.
Cool. So, question by Bob the Builder. What does your typical day look like? How many hours of the day do you work, play?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely no like defined everyday kind of schedule or anything. Every day is pretty different. Especially, when I'm in school, it's really just the normal day of any other college student, going to classes, doing homework, having maybe some free time to watch a Netflix episode. But yeah, nothing too crazy. Usually, when I'm doing any sort of training or research, sometimes those have classes that come along with them. So I'll just add that class to my normal workload in terms of classes. But for any sort of like physical training, I usually go to wherever it may be. I'm usually there for about a week, do that all day, every day for a week, and then kind of go back to my normal life. And then, yeah, but I mean, for the most part, it's really just trying to find a balance. I mean, definitely still hanging out with friends and just being a normal kid as well. But yeah, for the most part, I would say it's probably just the normal load of a normal college student. But then you also have to add on like whether it's interviews or speech or any other little things like that. I also have an internship now, which is also another level to play in. So that is now a good 10 hours a week at least. So yeah, just trying to balance it all. But there's definitely no everyday schedule. Every day is so different.
Another question by Anmol. What's the highest G force you've experienced?
I think, let's see, I think the highest G's that I've been like put on is probably 3.4, if I'm not mistaken, which isn't too bad. 3.4 is not bad at all. Most astronauts go through at least 8. So 3.4 is definitely not not bad at all. But yeah, that's probably the most I've done.
How did it feel? Like a roller coaster, I guess?
Yeah, you just feel really heavy. Having additional G's put on you is basically just like however many of yourself sitting on top of you. So, I mean, 3.4 would be like almost 3.5 of me sitting on top of me. So it's really just multiplying your weight. So you definitely just feel like a brick. You just feel like you can't move. Moving your arm is difficult. To just raise it. But yeah, it's definitely cool to be able to feel that. But I mean, when you take off in a rocket, you're definitely going to feel that pressure pushing back on you.
So, Alyssa, last question. This one's from me. If you get a call tonight from NASA telling you that you're leaving tomorrow for Mars, what will be your last meal on Earth?
Um, oh, that's so tough. I don't know. I maybe like either it would probably either be some like Louisiana dish. So like I mean being from Louisiana, I love like gumbo, jambalaya, crawfish, those sorts of things. It would probably either be that or sushi because I'm a big sushi
Ooh.
person. I love sushi. So it would probably be one of those two. I don't know if sushi would be the best to put in my stomach like before flying on a rocket, but it would probably be in some of my top meals.
Alyssa, where can people find more about you?
Yeah, all of my stuff, whether it's social media, website, again, almost any sort of social media is all under NASA Blueberry, website nasablueberry.com. So, yeah, check me out.
Alyssa, thank you so much. It was so amazing.